Hey everybody, thanks for coming. I'm here to introduce the man standing in the back of the room back there, Mr. Mike Lupica. He's a former BC alum. He began his career writing for the Boston Globe, the Phoenix, as well as the BC Heights. At 23, he was the beat writer for the New York Post, covering the New York Knicks. At 24, he became the youngest sports writer with a column in New York City. His writing has appeared in, let me get the list out, Newsday, The National, ESPN The Magazine, Esquire, Sport, World Tennis, Travel and Leisure Golf, Sports Illustrated, Parade, and even Playboy. He's collaborated with the likes of Bill Parcells, Reggie Jackson, and William Goldman, writing everything from biographies to now young adult fiction. He's won numerous awards and is a regular on ESPN The Sports Reporters, Sunday mornings, 10 o'clock. And for almost 30 years now, he's been writing anywhere between 4 and 30 columns for the Daily News. I've been lucky enough to consider him a personal friend for the better part of my life, and I hope to consider him a mentor and a writer and a colleague. Everybody in the back of the room, Mr. Mike Lupica.
Thank you. It's great to be back here. I have to tell you that my writing career began at two places, at the Heights and in Paul Doherty's English class. He saw something in me other than a smart mouth when I got to BC in the early 1970s and enabled me to learn more about the craft of writing in one semester than anybody's ever taught me ever since. And I graduated from Boston College in 1974, or if I'm on a talk show, or 1970. And before long, I had this column in the New York Daily News, and I thought it was a pretty big deal. And my first year writing the column, there was a football game at the very end of the season where the New York Jets, who were terrible that year, were playing the Buffalo Bills, who were equally terrible, at Shea Stadium. And it was the year after O.J. Simpson had gained 2,000 yards for the Bills. I don't know what happened to him. He was in the news later on, but I can't exactly remember for what. But his offensive line had become very famous. It was known as the Electric Company. And the star of it and the spokesman was a guy named Reggie McKenzie. And so they were like 2-11, and the Jets were 2-11, and they're playing this meaningless game at Shea Stadium. So I was going to write a column about how much his life had changed in a year and how he was playing this empty game after being the toast of the sporting world. So I called him up on Saturday night, and we had this interview, and I never met him. And he said, listen, come down to the locker room after the game. And I said, okay. So we had an early edition, even though it was a 1 o'clock football game. And I wrote most of my column, and it's freezing at Shea Stadium on this day. And the press box at Shea in those days was absolutely as cold as the football field. And so I've got my old Olympia typewriter, and I'm writing away. And I leave just a paragraph so I have time to go down and introduce myself to my new pal, Reggie McKenzie. So I've got my parka on and I've got my hood on because I'm still freezing and I've been typing away. And so now I go down to the locker room and here's Reggie McKenzie, but he's talking to another older New York sports writer. So there was a certain protocol that you followed. So he's sitting here and I'm standing there, but I'm still freezing. I got my hood on and I got my parka on and I always carried little notebooks. And I'm standing there and I got my pen and he starts to look up at me and he'd look up at me and I'd smile and then he'd go back to talking to the oldest sports writer. Finally, the fourth time he looks at me, he takes my notebook and he takes my pen and he writes, "Best wishes, Reggie McKenzie," and hands it back to me. And at that point, I knew that I wasn't quite as big a deal as I had thought I was when I first got this column. I always wanted to write. I've never thought of myself as anything other than a writer. I've been lucky enough to find a Dodge on Sunday morning on a show called The Sports Reporters, where we could have T-shirts printed that say "We'll bicker for food." But I never thought of myself as a television personality. I never thought of myself as any kind of big deal on the radio. I always wanted to write. My heroes were writers. My newspaper heroes were Jimmy Breslin and Pete Hamill, who I was lucky enough to work with later in my life. I had this idea when I got here that maybe I could write a column someday in New York, and maybe I could write books. I didn't have any plan other than that. But I really wanted to write fiction at some point, because I had seen the guys that I admired do that. And so I began to have this career as a newspaper man, and then finally, in the 1980s, I wrote my first novel. My first book was an autobiography with Reggie Jackson. It was 40 hours of tape that felt like 400 hours. But I managed to get through that, and then I wrote a series of mystery novels about a New York City television reporter named Peter Finley. One of them became a movie that I wrote, but still, I didn't feel like I had hit my stride as a novelist. But the one thing my newspaper column had taught me was that any kind of good story, even if it only took 800 words in a newspaper, had to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it also had to have dialogue in it to move the story around. So I always felt that the greatest training ground that I had for writing fiction was writing this newspaper column. And I couldn't begin to tell you how many newspaper columns I've written in my life. I've written 4 columns a year for the last 600 years. So you can do the math on that. And then finally, and then I wrote a series of comic novels about pro football and baseball, and I put a woman in the NBA, and one was called Bump and Run, and they were about boys misbehaving in sports, and they kind of did okay. And I still didn't feel like I had found my stride. And then 3 years ago, my middle boy came home one day, and I had a piece of paper, and I knew he had been told that he hadn't made his 7th grade travel basketball team in our town. And the way they did it, if any of you have ever played travel sports, you'd fill out a self-addressed envelope when you go in to try out, and then they'd send you the word in a week or two that told you whether or not it made the team. Now, Alex Lupica, the first 2 years he had tried out, had made the team, and he was a good basketball player. And then I had gotten a call the night before telling me that he wasn't going to make it. He wasn't going to make 7th grade travel. And I've been around sports long enough to know there comes a point eventually when sports tells you you're not good enough, unless you're Michael Jordan, or unless you're guys who can end up in the pros, or Barry Bonds, and you can take things and get even bigger and better than you were before. No, I digress. Anyway, so this is the first time that sports is going to break my kid's heart, and I'm waiting all day, and I figure he has a right to open this letter by himself. And he comes home, and he opens it up, and he bursts into tears, and he said, "This is my favorite sport," and so here for the first time, a bunch of adults had told somebody that they didn't think he was good enough. Okay. So kids bounce back. I'm more of a grudge holder. So about 2 days later, I'm talking to Jeff Van Gundy, who had quit the Knicks. And why would anybody ever want to quit a dream situation like that? And he was working in television at the time, and he said, if this were the movies, you'd start a team of all the kids who got cut, and you'd end up playing the team that cut them in the big game. And I didn't really have any interest in playing the team that cut. I wasn't trying to prove a point. But, and this really speaks to how the best fiction comes out of your own life, and it comes out of your own experience. I mean, if there's any theme to what I've done the last couple of years, it's that. So in the space of a week, I took all the kids who got cut. There were 12 kids and at this point in my life, I become the entrepreneur of a 12-year-old travel boys basketball team without any clue about where we were going to practice, who was going to coach us, and who we're going to play. But when I called the kids to tell them they were going to be a team, they seemed fairly happy, so I thought I was going good. So I hire a coach, and I get a list of all the travel teams in our area of Connecticut. And I start cold calling coaches and trying to schedule games. And I said, listen, and most of the guys would call me back and they'd say, is this really who you say? I said, yeah, but I've got this team and I need a game on January 15th, but we have to play at your gym because I don't have a gym. And they'd say, okay. Now, at this point, I make a rookie mistake. I don't ask any of these coaches how good their team is. And we start our season, and we can't advance the ball. I mean, we can't get the ball to half court. We're going into South Norwalk, Connecticut, and we're playing teams that look like the Florida team that won the NCAA championships, and I'm losing 35-3 at halftime. And and I'd go home at night, and I'd say to my wife, when does the Disney movie kick in here exactly? I said, I did this to improve the self-esteem of these kids. And I said, they're walking out, and I said, we're getting killed. And she said, you know what, it'll get better. And then the coach, who's a wonderful guy named Keith Wright, he says, it'll get better. And I say, okay. Now, there's one other little guy besides my son Alex who got cut, and I thought for being small. And his name was Connor Donovan. Now, when I started the team, I called up his mother, and I said, Gail, listen, tell Connor, stop feeling bad. We're going to have a team. We're going to have uniforms. It's going to be great. And she said, listen, Connor may have to miss some games at the start of the year because he's in the play. And I said, Gail, how much time can you miss from basketball with the school play? And she said, no, he's in Our Town on Broadway with Paul Newman. And I said, okay, that's a good excuse. So you know, these are the things that happen in the world of sports up in La-di-da, Connecticut. So we're getting killed, and I keep waiting for the Disney movie to kick in. And Connor Donovan the run of the play ends, and he joins my kid in the back, and all of a sudden we start beating teams who had beaten us. I can remember, I can tell you exactly where I stood in Westport, Connecticut, peering around the corner as we won an overtime game, because I had convinced myself these kids were never going to win a game. Before every game, I would say the same thing to these kids. I'd say, listen, we're not in any league here, okay? So you're not going to be in March Madness. You're not going to go to the playoffs. But every time you go out there, you're playing for the championship of every kid who got told by some dopey adult that he wasn't good enough in sports. And they'd go charging out of the locker room, and they got good. They actually got good. They started winning some games, and this becomes what I had hoped it would be, which was one of the great sports experiences of my life. The last game of the season, we play a team that had killed us in January. We beat them by 1 point on a free throw with 3 seconds left by a kid named Brendan Fitzpatrick. These kids run around the gym like they've won the championship of the whole universe. And we have a dinner at the end of the year. I give out trophies. It's really how I ever got kids to play on my teams. I gave out the best trophies. And I gave out huge quantities of big trophies. So kids really wanted to play on my team. So anyway, now the season ends. The season ends, and I call up my agent. And I said, I saw something really great, but I don't know what it was. I don't know whether it was a nonfiction book. I don't know whether it's a movie. I don't know what it is. She said, make something up. Make something up where that's the bare bones of the story. And so I came up with a little kid named Danny Walker. And I wrote an outline for a book called Travel Team. And my wife would later say that she saw this coming because me writing from inside the mind of a 12-year-old boy she thought was perfect casting. That she said, you found the room you've been looking for because you never really got past that yourself. So I wrote the story of a kid whose dad had been an NBA player who had had sort of a life like Bobby Hurley. Again, cherry-picking stuff out of my own experience. I mean, Bobby Hurley did not have a drunk driving accident. He just tragically got hit by a car and saw his career ended. But his father has been away. And anyway, I write this outline, and she sells it that afternoon. And now I actually have to, without any plan or any knowledge of how you do this, I have to write a young adult novel, the summer of 2003. Now, usually I leave the summer for 3 months of complaining about my golf game. I don't play very well, but I bitch about it all summer, and it's just been something that's worked for me for a long time. Now I actually have to write, now I have to write this book about, now I'm mad at these little, gutty underdog 12-year-olds because they've forced me to actually have to write this book. So I start writing the story of Danny Walker, and I get about 20 pages written, and I finally have the guts, like I was handing a paper to Professor Doherty back in the day, okay? I finally have the guts to show it to my wife. And my boys and I are watching a ball game that night, and I give her the first 20 pages in this little manila envelope, and we go back to watching the ball game. And she comes down about an hour later. She comes walking into my den. She throws the pages at me. And I said, what? And she said, this is the best thing you've ever written. Shut up and finish the book. Which I did. And this book about these kids, it changed my writing life. It came out in October of 2004. Some people will remember that October is one of the local sports teams. I associate it more with Travel Team. That's just, somebody won something here they hadn't won in a long time. But Travel Team came out, and within 3 weeks it was the #1 bestseller, and it's the only kind of book that I'm going to write from now until somebody makes me stop. It's everything that I knew about sports. It's everything I'd seen. And it worked because the best of sports I had seen through my own kids. I had done this sort of work. I joke about this all the time. The sports writing thing had to work out for me. I have no other skills. So it was not like I had something to fall back on. It wasn't like, I could fix a carburetor or install cable. This was it. So I had done this a long time, but you get tired sometimes of the direction you see the sports world going in. It's changed dramatically since I left Boston College. And it's gotten meaner, and it's gotten louder, and it's gotten nastier sometimes. And then you start seeing it through the eyes of your children. And what you see is they see the bad stuff, but they're so much able to focus on the good. If I brought in the 12 kids who played on my travel basketball team, and I asked them what our record was, they would all tell me, I guarantee you, because I've seen this from my own son, they would tell me it's better than it was. The experience was, they remember so much more the way it ended than the way it began. And it showed me once again that you, for all of the crap you run into in sports sometimes, you remember the triumphs more, Red Sox fans will remember Aaron Boone's home run, but they're going to remember Ortiz's home run better. They're going to remember that extra inning game and the next extra inning game and the way Schilling pitched in Game 6 and Damon's home run in Game 7. And it's one of the first things you learn in youth sports, that a kid's going to remember one attaboy more than you look and give him a look when he misses a shot or strikes out. And so I saw sports all over again through the eyes of my kid, and the view was tremendous. The view has been tremendous. It continues to be tremendous. And if there's one thing that shines through, I wrote Travel Team. I have another book, Heat, that came out in the last week about a 12-year-old baseball pitcher. And again, it's about the beauty of the games and how the beauty of the games can still wipe out all the stuff that makes you just want to turn off your television set or not go to the game or say that you're never going to go to another game again. Heat is the story. Again, I took experiences out of my own life and sort of made this stew out of them and came up with a boy named Michael Arroyo. People always say, what is the starting point of a novel? This novel started on the day of the baseball strike in August of 1994. The Yankees were playing a day game, and I wanted to go out to Yankee Stadium and write a column about what a loss this was going to be. Because nobody knew that we were going to lose the World Series that year, but you kind of suspected that the worst was going to come at midnight when they were going to walk off the job. And I go out to the ballpark early, and I'm wandering around because the neighborhood up there is very dramatic. And I cross 161st Street, and here's kids playing soccer on a soccer field across the street. And I go up to the woman in charge, and I said, where are you from? And she says, the Morrisania Air Rights Community Center on 159th and Park. And I said, would these kids like to go to a baseball game today? And she said, yeah. I run back across 161st Street, so I'm going to try to buy 30 tickets to the game. A guy named Jerry Davina, who works at the press gate at Yankee Stadium, says, a big group just turned in a bunch of tickets. How many do you need? I said, I need like 30 tickets. He counts them out. I go running back across the street, and I take these kids to a ball game that day. All of them live within 4 blocks of Yankee Stadium. 3 of them had ever been inside. And I started thinking that day, what would it be like to have the most famous place in American sports close enough to touch and you can't get inside? And so I came up with this Little League pitcher who lives 1 block away, never been inside. I just adjust the facts slightly. The game that sends you to Williamsport in the Little League World Series this year is going to be played, they're going to turn it into a Little League park for 1 day. So this kid knows if he pitches good enough, and he's the best 12-year-old pitcher in the world, he can get there. Except people don't think he's 12. Because here's the other element that I stole from my life covering sports. You guys are also, you know who I'm talking about, Danny Almonte. Here's a kid who said he was 12 and turned out to be 14. And I thought that, when that happened, I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if you had a kid who was 12 and couldn't prove it, who was the age he said he was, but had come from Cuba without a birth certificate. And so these coaches gang up on this boy and get him off the field to play. And so part of the action of the book is him finding this birth certificate in time to get to walk through the doors of Yankee Stadium for the first time and pitch in the place where he can sit on his fire escape on a summer night and he can hear the cheers from inside the ballpark before he actually hears them on the radio. So that's what Heat is about. And it's, if there's one thing about the kids that are the same from Travel Team to Heat, it's that they're old school kids. They're not doing anything that tries to get them on SportsCenter that night. They're not part of what I call the hey, look at me culture of modern sports. They're not grabbing their chests. They're old school. I mean, maybe I'm fictionalizing them too much to think that they wouldn't be influenced, but Michael Arroyo and Danny Walker in Heat are the same type of kid, and they keep saying it in different ways throughout these books, and it is, sports is supposed to be my best against your best. I've coached, my son Chris is here tonight, I've coached all of my sons. I'm currently the coach of a first grade girls soccer team that I think you'll be hearing a little bit about a month. It's the greatest. This really has nothing to do with anything, but it's like watching ants move food. And it's not like, it's not like when I grew up, it was go Bobby, go Mike. It's go Peyton, go Mackenzie, go Madison, because nobody has normal names up where I live. But what I find as I coach is that too many adults who coach kids in sports forget that it's not about them. And believe me, most of the bad coaches in youth sports make up about 1%. If I ask for a show of hands, everybody's had one bad coach, okay? Yeah. But most of them are good, and most of them volunteer their time, and most of them realize that it's not about them. And the best ones realize that to watch kids of 8 or 9 or 10 or 11 or 12, or as they get older, get together and do something great together is the essence of what sports is supposed to be. And it's given me, I thought I knew what I was doing in writing other books, and now these books, I go to a youth game now and I see another novel break out. I mean, I can't look at this stuff. And when I talk to kids about these books, I will tell them, honestly, every one of you has a story. Every one of you is a novel, because now I've seen it with my own eyes. I was saying to Alex Lupica not long ago, I said, that day when you got that letter telling that you'd been cut, I said, that was the first day that sports broke your heart, wasn't it, Alex? And he said, yeah. I said, but it's been really good for Dad. We went to a signing one time, and he was sitting up in the audience, and he raised his hand. And he said, I've heard you talk quite a bit about your son Alex and how he got cut and how that was the inspiration for the book. Has he been able to share in any of the royalties of the book? I said, you're a very impertinent young man. Next question over here. It's been a wonderful. It's been a tremendous experience. I was driving here today, and my son Chris is going to come here in the fall, and it was a great day to be at BC. And I got a call about 5 o'clock, and found out that Heat had debuted at number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list. So I can't wait to get up and write in the morning. If I can tell you that if one thing hasn't changed in my life since I was a student at this school, it's that the best part of my day is the writing part of my day. You talk about old school, I write longhand. Professor Doherty said to me today, are you still writing on unlined yellow paper? And I said, yes. I said, I have to order it special now, and I'll write longhand for 5 or 10 or 15 pages, and then I'll type it in, so it's like a second draft. But I love telling these stories. When I was taking his course here, I was telling some young men and women from the Heights tonight that he had a course where he'd give us a piece of writing by somebody, and he had to imitate that style. Not in a Jason Blair sort of way, but you had to write an original story using somebody else's voice, and it told me more about style than any course I ever took ever since. And then eventually you find your own voice. And I think now it took me my whole writing life to find that writing for kids was what I was supposed to be doing, because it was a positive way to take everything I had learned about sports. I've seen the best of sports. I've seen the worst of it too, but I've seen the best of it. I was in Lake Placid the night the hockey team beat the Russians in 1980, and I knew that night that I had seen the greatest sports story I was ever going to see. And it kind of made me sad, because I knew that nothing I was ever going to see again. I took my kids to Game 4. Well, they were at Game 3 of the Yankees series in 2004, and left somewhere before it became 19-8. The next night, they're sitting at the pesky pole when Ortiz hits the home run. Now, Mrs. Lupica had said that they had to go home to school for Monday because there had been a rainout. Remember, there were 2 years in a row there was a rainout. So game 5 was going to be at 5 o'clock the next afternoon. So I said, whenever the game ends, I'll drive them home to Connecticut, and then I'll come back to Boston for game 5. We left Fenway Park at 2 o'clock the morning of Ortiz's home run. And I walked down, and all you're thinking at that point is, well, the Red Sox got a game. You know, they're going to get carried out on their shields. They got a game. And I walked down to Yawkey Way in the middle of the night, and there are people stretched from Boylston Street to Brookline Avenue. And they're waiting for Ortiz's car to pull out. And they start chanting his name, and I said, these people, these poor, crazy people, they think they have a chance to win the series. So I drive the kids back. They get home at 4:30 in the morning. They go to school. I take the train back. I said to my wife, hey, honey, I'll be home in a decent hour tonight because the game starts at 5 o'clock. And there's no chance that they could play for, say, 5 hours and 48 minutes again. And then they win again. And what I have said about that series, and it's not original, but I've written this and said this for a long time. The wonderful thing about sports is how fragile these games are. Because here's how the greatest sports story in baseball history began. A walk, a pinch runner, a stolen base, and a single up the middle against the closest thing to a sure thing there's ever been in the history of baseball. And there isn't a living soul who was watching that game that night who would have said, the Yankees are starting to fall down a hill. But the Yankees had started to tumble down a hill, and we didn't know what was happening. That a team could actually come from 3-zip down because of a walk, a stolen base, and a single up the middle. And literally the course of the history of two franchises changed in that moment. And the whole dynamic between the two changed. Now they go back to Fenway Park, or go back to Yankee Stadium. Schilling, of course, pitches on the bloody sock. Now it's the morning of Game 7. A friend of mine who lives in Connecticut, who's a huge Red Sox fan, sends me an email in the morning, and it's as serious as a toothache, and I could see how passionate he was, and he wanted an honest answer. And he said, I had tickets last year, and I was at Yankee Stadium when Aaron Boone hit that home run. He said, somebody just called and offered me 2 tickets to tonight. And he said, I'm not going to hold you to this, but should I go? And I sent him back an email, and I had watched the last 3 games, and I said, I will not utter this to another single living person for the rest of this day. But I said, grab those tickets. I said, because the Yankees are so done, this ending will be different. And this guy is conditioned to losing. He's conditioned to Aaron Boone hitting the home run. But sports can change in an instant. And 80,000 years can go out the window when a guy hits a grand slam early in the game. And if you're a Red Sox fan that night, you still don't believe. You still think that somehow in the last 11 seconds of the game, the Yankees are going to score 27 runs. And how many here are Red Sox fans? Okay. How many thought that the sky was falling when Francona brought in Martinez out of the bullpen? Yeah, that's right. But it didn't happen. It didn't happen that way. I still, is there ever, well, we'll get to this in a minute, but has there ever been a logical explanation of why he did this? Why he tortured people that way? I don't think so. Anyway, but in those 4 days, in those 4 days, you found out why you care about sports. And I've said this ever since, you know, even if you rooted for the Yankees in that series, and I know that there's Yankees fans, and I grew up in upstate New York, and I know how deep the Yankee thing is. You appreciated that you were witnessing something you'd never seen again. And if I'll leave you with one thought, and then I want to be able to take questions. When I lose that sense, when I go to the game not thinking that I might see something today I've never seen before, then I'll know it's time for me to move on. I saw Kirk Gibson hit that home run with my own eyes. I saw Ruzioni, whose father owned a pizza place over, become a name that is known by everybody. One of the great things as a parent for me is seeing how engaged my kids are when the movie Miracle came out, and how much they love this story of those hockey players. And sports at the end is about memory, and it's about imagination. It's the memory-making business that tops all others. You buy a ticket, and you go to the game, and you hope that there'll be a memory there that you'll take with you forever. In 1991, when Jimmy Connors, at the age of 39, comes out of nowhere to make the semifinals of the U.S. Open, the greatest tennis thing I've ever seen, there was a famous match, and everybody's seen it because in every rain delay ever since, they have played the Connors-Krickstein match. Everybody probably thinks that they have the match memorized. I was sitting in the front row that day, and my wife was with me, and Connors comes from 5-2 down in the fifth set, and he wins, and he makes the semifinals of the Open at the age of 39. And on the way home that day, my wife said to me, everybody who had a ticket to that match today feels like they helped Jimmy win. And I'm thinking, if you knew every time you bought a ticket to a sports event, even as the prices keep going up, that on the way home from a match like that, you could feel like that, you'd pay anything for that ticket. Listen, thank you very much for coming. Please don't go, please don't go, and it would affect my self-esteem. But if you've got questions, please, I would love to take some questions, and then we'll call it a night. So I think they want you, if you got a question, to come to the microphone, because this is a very nice-looking group, and I'd love to tell you my joke about the 3 guys waiting to get into heaven, but there's going to be a record of this night, and I can't do it. Oh, the mic's here. Hold on. I don't need a mic. Here you go. Here you go. Just hold it. It's fine.
Thanks very much, Mike. First of all, can I have 2 questions, because I'm the oldest person here?
Sure.
Okay. My first question goes way back to that boring game you talked about, Buffalo and the Jets. My question is this. Do you know you're catering to a negative audience, and probably an audience that has nothing to do else that day except read a negative story? How do you make that interesting, knowing that you're catering to a negative audience? That's number one, okay? Number 2 is I've coached a lot of teams for my kids, etc., just like you. What is more important? The kids remembering the good things as they walk out of the field, and you knowing that and writing about that, okay, versus the kids losing, okay, and remembering their mistakes, okay, remembering their mistakes when they walk off the field, and carry that into the next game versus walking off the field and feeling great because, and not remembering the mistakes. Mistakes are gone because they won. If a kid makes an error, and 2 runs score, but they croak the other team, he doesn't remember that when he comes off the field. When they lose, they do remember mistakes. My question is, what's more important? The kids walking off the field, not remembering their mistakes when they win, versus losing and do remember their mistakes. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. What do I do now?
Just put it back in that thing.
So the first one was a Buffalo Jets game.
Oh, there's always something that engages me about the game. There's always something. I'll see something. There's a moment in the game that I'll be able to build a column on. There's always something that I see that I find interesting about the game I'm watching. I went to opening day at Yankee Stadium a couple of, about 10 days ago, wherever it was, and it occurred to me that if they're going to tear this place down and move across the street, so there's only going to be 2 more opening days at Yankee Stadium. After all the opening days and all the majesty of the place and everything that I've seen there, I'm going to get to do this 2 more times. And I keep saying, I'm sure the new ballpark across the street will be swell, but it's not going to be that place. It's like I know the inconveniences of Fenway Park. I'd be sad if Fenway was gone. And I know that they're constrained by everything, but they've made that experience there great. So there's always going to be something about the game I'm watching that makes me want to write about it, you know? As for the kids losing, Pete Hamill said something great to me, and it comes out of prize fighting, and it's true. And I tell kids this when I coach them. Anybody can get knocked down. Anybody can get knocked down. It takes no genius or skill or talent. But it's how you get up. It's how you get up that people remember. And so, yeah, I think you lose. You know, there's a whole school of thought that you can't learn how to win in sports till you know how to lose. But you know, the thing that made me mad with going back to the original story about travel team is I know that, you know, most of the kids I coach, and probably all the kids I coach, aren't going to go to the pros. But I never thought that, you know, at the age of 12 that youth sports should be like The Apprentice, you know, where some adult calls you in and tells you you're fired. But yeah, no, I think you learn something. I always tell kids when I'm coaching, you know, we're going to try to win the game tonight, you know. Everybody's going to get their playing time, but we're going to try to win the game. The other team's trying to win, and you guys have a right to win, and you have a right to feel bad about losing. I said, you know, there's a reason why they keep score in sports, and so, oh yeah, for sure. You know, I think the losing comes into it, and it's unrealistic. I mean, there's a whole school of thought. If you're parents, you know this. That I've heard a lot of guys of my generation say, I didn't used to get a trophy just for making the team. The only time I got a trophy is if I won something. You know, so all of us, you know, these us tree-hugging baby boomers, you know. I mean, I told you, I give out a ton of trophies. I give out certificates, you know. I don't buy them cars, but, you know, I would. No, it's youth sports, though. I still want it to be about getting together, doing something great, and trying to win the game. You all can hear me in the back, right? I don't need the mic. Because if you can't hear me in the back, you'll be the first group that couldn't hear me in the back.
You hinted at this a little bit, and it's more in reference to your novels. Do you have a specific method that you use when you go into writing a novel, like a specific time frame you set for yourself, outlining, chapter outlines, and whatnot?
Yeah. Here's what I do. I have a funny way of working. I know a lot of authors by now, and some guys will not talk about what they're writing. I am the complete opposite of that. If I'm writing a book, I'm talking about it, okay? My friend, one of my writing heroes is a guy named William Goldman. He wrote The Princess Bride, which I consider to be the greatest. I mean, to call it a children's book isn't grand enough. It's just one of the great books I've ever read and one of the great movies. And he wrote Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and Marathon. He's had an amazing career. He's as close a friend as I have. And he talks about spitballing. And when I'm finally ready to write a novel, and I've done some outlining, the last thing I do is I go into his apartment in New York City, and I say, okay, here's the bare bones of my story. And we spitball for a morning, okay? And he's got one rule of spitballing. You can't be afraid to say whatever stupid thing comes into your head. Because his point is, I might say something dumb, and I frequently do, but it'll touch off something with him, and I'm taking notes the whole time. And then the story takes on another life with me, and now I'm ready to start the book. Sometimes I have an idea how the book's going to end, okay? And it's a little easier with these novels that I'm writing because, you know, I want them to make kids stand up and cheer, okay? But Elmore Leonard, who is probably my number one writing hero, and it's someone who's given me great counsel, told me something once that I've never forgotten. He said, you write the book to find out what happens. And it sounds simple, but it's so true. I just get them out, you know, I get them in a room and I get them talking and stuff. I don't think of myself as a great plotter. I'm the most pleasantly surprised person when there's a good surprise in one of my books is me. I'll write something, I'll say, whoa, how did that happen? You know, because I don't think I think I write pretty good dialogue because most of the dialogue in the books I'm writing now comes from my kid. It really comes right off of my dinner table. My kids will bust me if I don't have kids talking the way they do. And kids will know if you're talking down to them. But as for the plotting of it, it's the same in every book I've ever written. I get to page 100, and I'll think, okay, I'm good now. I've introduced everybody. I've set up some sort of tension. Now, where the hell am I going from here? 100 to 200. They're usually about 300 pages, these books, in manuscript form. 100 to 200 is always a battle. Then when I make the turn for home, I usually feel like I'm in pretty good command of the material. I'm at 200 now in the sequel to Travel Team, and I sort of have an idea where it's going. But I believe that plotting comes out of the story you're telling. That if you overplot, now there's friends of mine. My friend Tony Gilroy wrote the first Bourne movie. Okay, his outlines are as long as his screenplays. So he knows where he's going. I kind of wander aimlessly and hope, you know, a really interesting story breaks out. But that's a good question because it's different for everybody. But I love to talk my way through. I know you probably find that shocking, but my friends know if I'm in a book, I want to talk about it, and I got used to it. When I'll call Elmore Leonard, I'll say, "How you doing?" And he'll say, "Well, so and so," and he'll immediately just be the main character and he'll say, "He's in Detroit today, and he's talking about them like they're real people," and it's a wonderful, goofy world to inhabit. Oh, you know, I can't. Listen, you know, he should go. I've tangled with him for 30 years. You know, we've had our ups and downs. I don't like the idea that, you know, that you can spend that much and get a competitive edge. But having said that, the guy ought to go to the Hall of Fame. He ought to be in the Hall of Fame. He took a $2 million investment 33 years ago. $2 million of his own money. He bought the team for 10, put up 2 of his own. It's worth $1 billion now. He made the Yankees matter again, and you know, it's a good thing. You know, it's a good thing. The sport needs an opponent like this, and and the saddest thing that's happening in my business right now is the tabloids. You want me to stop soon? Okay. The saddest thing that's happening in my business right now is they still try to portray him as the big bad boss, and he's not. You know. They stake him out after games, trying to get any comment to put on the back page of the newspaper, and it's sad. You know, he's gotten older. He's not who he was. There's no shame in him not being who he was, but, you know, this idea that if this happens, it's going to incur the wrath of Steinbrenner, you know, I'm telling you, I love Larry Lucchino, but he's a lot tougher to work for these days, I bet, than George is. So, yeah, I mean, listen, nobody's tangled with him more, but nobody has a greater appreciation of what he's done.
Do you like writing novels?
I like writing these. Listen, everything I've been able to do in my life it comes because I can write a newspaper column. And like the other night, I went to Shea and saw Pedro win his 200th game, and I will never lose the thrill of writing something at 11 o'clock at night knowing it's going to be on my doorstep. The feeling I have about writing my column is the same as I have writing for the Heights. I still imagine that I'm doing that. You know, I was writing for my buddies back in the old days. If I told you I didn't like seeing my name in the paper, I'd be lying to you. I do. It's fun. But I love writing these books. I know that this is, you know, after 30 years of doing one thing, whatever started with me with Travel Team, I'm on an upward curve. I'm learning as I go. So I feel like in that area, I'm just sort of starting out again. And I love going to the ballpark still, but those few hours in the morning when I'm sitting there scribbling on unlined yellow paper. That's a pretty cool part of, it's a cool part of my day.
How did you do in your office March Madness pool this year?
Oh, I don't even do it. My kids they're much more passionately involved than I do, because I know I would just embarrass myself. No, my kids are the breadwinners in the family when it comes to, is this screwing you up not being able to hear you don't care, do you? Okay, no, I don't even fill out a bracket. I don't, there's no point into it. I'm always pleasantly surprised by the way it unfolds, unless a team gives up a layup with 1 second left. Stinking Villanova, because they can't cover a stinking inbounds pass, but I've let go of that. It's gone. As you can see, it doesn't bother. What? Do you want me to tell them?
No. Keep going.
All right. Stand up so I can hear you. I'm getting old.
You had one sporting event to cover. World Series, I'm sure you've seen it all. You said you saw the Ashe game. But if you could just say you, Suns, you can go to one game.
Saturday at the Final Four, the doubleheader day. It's still my favorite day of the year in sports. And you know what? They weren't even great games this year. Now again, if you listen to me tonight, if I could go back, I'd go back to Lake Placid, okay? Because it was just, I will always feel those guys were mine, okay? I went to every practice, I went to every game. It's just, no one knew, okay? Except we knew that night, the game was played at 5 o'clock, it wasn't coming on TV, so there was this feeling in Lake Placid that night that we knew something the world didn't know yet, and then the words started to filter out. But I like walking into the Super Bowl, I do. A big baseball game. My favorite thing to do in sports is to go to the ballpark. If you ask me what my favorite experience, sit in any ballpark on a nice day and watch a baseball game. Baseball's still my favorite sport. But because every year I take my 3 boys to the Final Four, and going to the Final Four, and Saturday, watching a good first game, or even if it's not a good, knowing that there's one more to come, that's a neat day for me in sports.
You said you liked your reaction when you saw Miracle. Have you ever considered writing a screenplay?
I actually have written one, I wrote one movie, one television movie from one of my mystery novels that was on CBS about 10 or 12 years ago. I actually wrote the teleplay. I actually had a speaking part in it. I played a bartender. I'm sure people looked at me like Reggie McKenzie did, saying, why is that little boy pouring drinks? Why is that little boy pouring? Does he have any ID? Shouldn't he be? Yeah, it was called Money, Power, and Murder, and it starred Kevin Dobson and Blythe Danner, and Julianne Moore was in it. It was a fun experience, but I don't have the temperament to have 14 producers and 3 other screenwriters picking at me. I've got an editor that I work with who's really smart and gets what I do and gives me good ideas, and other than that, I have no interest in writing for the movies. I just like being by myself, and when I please my editor and please myself, that I know that book will go into the stores, but I don't know how guys go through 10 drafts of a screenplay. I mean, believe me, I admire people who do it, and come out with something great. I just don't have the temperament or the personality. Let me tell you a couple more. Now, I said to my wife later, okay, quickly I identified whether or not I thought this was a trick question, okay? And then it was one of those dumb things. Go ahead.
I was just wondering who is some of your favorite or least favorite athletes to work with and be around usually?
My favorite athlete that I was ever around was Arthur Ashe. I was proud to know him. I was proud to call him a friend of mine. It was, I will borrow a line from the great Jimmy Cannon, who said that Joe Louis was a credit to his race, the human race. The loss of Arthur Ashe was just as great a loss as sports and our country could have. I was always partial to Connors, because Connors and I are the same age, and even though we butted heads a lot, we came along at the same time, and I got to see the whole show with him. I saw the whole thing with Magic and Bird, and it was just tremendous. I mean, I saw them play in that final in Salt Lake in 1979 and watched their whole careers play out. I have a lot of favorites. I love sports. You know, there's this idea that, you know, that if you do what I do, you're ripping people all the time. If you go back and read my columns over all the years, you find that most of the time I'm looking to celebrate sports. I'm looking for the great moment. And I've been around in an unbelievable, I saw all of Jordan, you know. I'm thrilled to be at a time where Tiger Woods is playing golf. The fan in me appreciates what I've been able to see since I began doing this for a living 30 years ago. Let me take somebody who haven't, right there.
Who's the smartest guy on the sports reporters?
The smartest guy on the sports, I am.
Just to follow up on the question before, being a big Yankee fan,
By a lot, by the way. It's really, if it's the GE college, no, really, if it's like deal or no deal, I would win. Good.
follow-up question before being a Yankee fan, who are some of your favorite and least favorite Yankees in recent years to be around?
My three favorite Yankees of all time are Mattingly's one, okay? Mattingly, as long as he's on the Hall of Fame ballot, will always get my vote, okay? Because I believe there was a time when he was the best player in baseball, and there's a lot of guys in the Hall of Fame who were never the best player in any time. Jeter, okay? Jeter, Red Sox fan I know, was saying to me, the best part about the World Baseball Classic, he said, I get to root for Jeter, okay? And then Ron Guidry. I love Ron Guidry. I think they've done a smart thing by bringing guys like that back. But Mattingly to me was everything a gentleman and a great athlete should be in sports. I love far and away, but Jeter, I love watching Jeter play baseball. And I love the manager. I love the manager. I've known the manager since he was a player manager for the Mets. I had a hand accidentally in getting him his first, getting him his job with the Braves a long time ago. So we've always had a very good relationship. But Mattingly, that's the short answer.
You talked a lot about the good and the bad in sports and experience. What do you think about the Knicks and the current players? Maybe now
I've known the coach of the Knicks for 30 years. He's been a friend of mine for 30 years. He coached my kids in the summer last year. I imagine this now as being like a Black Hawk Down thing where we've got to get him out of there somehow. That there has to be, you know, where you put the stuff on your face and you put the black Knick cap on. We've got to get Larry out of there because it's the biggest single mess in professional sports at this time and one of the biggest messes ever. And you know, he's going to get better, so I can say this. You know, when he got sick last week, and I said, if he dies, it's on Marbury. I gotta wrap this up. I should have started. Stupidly, I didn't start taking questions soon enough. Again, I can't tell you. This has been a great day for me on a lot of levels. I got to bring my son here today. I got the news about Heat. I got to see Paul Doherty again. I love this place, and believe me, anytime you guys want me to come back and talk, I'd be happy to do it. Thank you very much.